Section 4, page 16. For some time we sat there without speaking. Then the warden got up and went to the window. Presently he said, "Ah, there is the padre from Marengo. He is a bit ahead of time. He warned me that it will take us a good 3/4 of an hour walking to the church, which was in the village." Then we went downstairs. The priest was waiting just outside the mortuary door. With him were two acolytes, one of whom had a censer. The priest was stooping over him, adjusting the length of the silver chain on which it hung. When he saw us, he straightened up and said a few words to me, addressing me as "my son." Then he led the way into the mortuary. I noticed at once that 4 men in black were standing behind the coffin, and the screws in the lid had been driven home. At the same moment, I heard the warden remark that the heirs had arrived, and the priest starting his prayers. Then everybody made a move. Holding a strip of black cloth, the 4 men approached to the coffin, while the priest, the boys, and myself filed out. A lady I hadn't seen before was standing by the door. "This is Monsieur Marcel," the warden said to her. I didn't catch her name, but I gathered she was a nursing sister attached to the home. When I was introduced, she bowed without the trace of a smile on her long, gaunt face. We stood aside from the doorway to let the coffin by. Then, following the bearers down a corridor, we came to the front entrance, where a hearse was waiting, oblong, glossy, varnished black all over. It vaguely reminded me of the pen trays in the office. Beside the hearse stood a quaintly dressed little man, whose duty it was, I understood, to supervise the funeral, as a sort of master of ceremonies. Near him, looking constrained, almost bashful, was old Mr. Perez, my mother's special friend. He wore a soft felt hat with a pudding basing crown and a very wide brim. He whisked it off the moment the coffin emerged from the doorway. Trousers that concerned on his shoes, a black tie much too small for his high white double collar. Under a bulbous, pimply nose, his lips were trembling. But what caught my attention most was his ears. Pendulous scarlet ears that shot up like blobs of ceiling wax on the pallor of his cheeks, and were framed in whips of silky white hair. The undertaker's factotum shepherded us to our places, with the priest in front of hers, and the 4 men in black on each side of it. The warden and myself came next, and, bringing up the rear, old Perez and the nurse. The sky was already a blaze of light, and the air stoking up rapidly. I felt the first waves of heat lapping my back, and my dark suit made things worse. I couldn't imagine why we waited so long for getting underway. Old Perez, who had put on his hat, took it off again. I had turned slightly in his direction and was looking at him when the warden started telling me more about him. I remember his saying that old Perez and my mother used often to have a long stroll together in the cool of the evening. Sometimes they went as far as the village, accompanied by a nurse, of course. I looked at the countryside, at the long lines of cypress sloping up toward the skyline, and the hills, the hot red soil dappled with vivid green, and here and there a lonely house sharply outlined against the light. And I could understand mother's feelings. Evenings in these parts must be a sort of mournful solace. Now, in the full glare of the morning sun, with everything shimmering in the heat haze, there was something inhuman, discouraging about this landscape. At last we made a move. Only then I noticed that Perez had a slight limp. The old chap steadily lost ground as the hearse gained speed. One of the men beside it, too, fell back under a level with me. I was surprised to see how quickly the sun was climbing up the sky. And just then it struck me that for quite a while the air had been throbbing with the hum of insects and the rustle of grass warming up. Sweat was running down my face. As I had no hat, I tried to fan myself with my handkerchief. The undertaker's man turned to me and said something that I didn't catch. At the same time, he wiped the crown of his head with a handkerchief that he held in his left hand, while with his right he tilted up his head. I asked him what he would say. He pointed upward. Sun is pretty bad today, ain't it? Yes, I said. After a while, he asked, Is it your mother we are burying? Yes, I said again. What was her age? Well, she was getting on. As a matter of fact, I didn't know exactly how old she was. After that, he kept silent. Looking back, I saw Perez limping along some 50 yards behind. He was swinging his big felt hat at arm's length, trying to make the pace. I also had a look at the warden. He was walking with carefully measured steps, economizing every gesture. Beads of perspiration glistened on his forehead, but he didn't wipe them off. I had an impression that our little procession was moving slightly faster. Wherever I looked, I saw the same sun-drenched countryside, and the sky was so dazzling that I dared not raise my eyes. Presently, we struck a patch of freshly tarred road. A shimmer of heat played over it, and one's feet squelched at each step, leaving bright black gashes. In front, the coachman's glossy black hat looked like a lump of the same sticky substance, poised above the hearse. It gave one a queer, dreamlike impression, that blue-white glare overhead and all this blackness round one. The slick black of the hairs, the dull black of the man's clothes, and the silvery black gashes in the road. And then there were the smells of hot leather and horse dung from the hairs, lined with whiffs of incense smoke. What with these and the hangover from a poor night's sleep, I found my eyes and thoughts growing blurred. I looked back again. Perez seemed very far away now, almost hidden by the heat haze. Then, abruptly, he disappeared altogether. After puzzling over it for a bit, I guessed that he had turned off the road into the fields. Then I noticed that there was a bend of the road a little way ahead. Obviously Perez, who knew the district well, had taken a shortcut, so as to catch up with us. He rejoined us soon after we were round the bend, then began to lose ground again. He took another shortcut and met us again farther on. In fact, this happened several times during the next half hour. But soon I lost interest in his movements. My temples were throbbing, and I could hardly drag myself along. After that, everything went with a rush, and also with such precision and matter-of-factness that I remember hardly any details, except that when we were on the outskirts of the village, the nurse said something to me. Her voice took me by surprise. It didn't match her face at all. It was musical and slightly tremulous. What she said was, if you go too slowly, there is the risk of a heart stroke, but if you go too fast, you perspire, and the cold air in the church gives you a chill. I saw her point. Either way, one was in for it. Some other memories of the funeral have stuck in my mind. The old boy's face, for instance, when he caught up with us for the last time, just outside the village. His eyes were streaming with tears, of exhaustion or distress, or both together. But because of the wrinkles, they couldn't flow down. They spread out, crisscrossed, and formed a smooth gloss on the old warm face. And I can remember the look of the church, the villagers in the street, the red geraniums on the graves. Perez, fainting fit, he crumbled up like a rag doll, the tawny red earth pattering on the mother's coffin. The bits of white roots mixed up with it. Then more people, voices, the wait outside a cafe for the bus, the rumble of the engine, and my little thrill of pleasure when we entered the first brightly lit stress of Algiers. And I pictured myself going straight to bed and sleeping 12 hours at stretch. End of the section 4, page 22.